Hi, I'm Phil Craig.
And I'm Andrew Lownie.
And together we aim to bring you the most scandalous stories and some of the most scandalous people in history. So thanks for joining us here on the Scandal Mongers podcast.
Andrew, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Long time no here.
Long time no here. And yes, another year, another set of scandals, another podcast. Are you excited?
I'm very excited. And we're beginning to get some feedback, which is good, what people like and don't like. We've been able to analyse the data to show what people are listening to. And though we want to give a range, it's clear royal stories are very popular.
Well, it's just as well that it's January 2023. Everybody's talking about a royal story, aren't they?
They are, yes. Prince Harry is always very good for a bit of media coverage, and we've got a particularly exciting guest today, haven't we?
We have. You should explain who she is, actually, Andrew, because I think she's a friend of yours.
Yes, she is. She's called Ailsa Anderson. She was the Queen's press secretary between 2001 and 2013. She's now has other jobs, but is a commentator on royal matters. Very well informed and very highly regarded. And I think she will be brilliant. She's always a great straight talker and has a very good reputation with the press.
Well, so, a real insider. I mean, we've been very lucky. We had Valentine the other day, who was probably the most important journalist in all of this Harry and Meghan stuff.
Yeah, no, we have been very fortunate, the people who want to take part and I'm sure also the same, will have interesting things to say, different things, because so much of royal reporting is very much the same stuff.
I've got a few things to say. I mean, I obviously a lot of this is, it's kind of grotesque. You can't stop watching it. It's like a car crash. You feel really sorry for the guy. Some of it's funny. I mean, all that stuff. Oh my God, the oversharing, the smacked bottoms, the drugs, frolicking behind pubs, strange.
It sounds like one of our books, doesn't it?
It sounds like us in 1978, doesn't it, Andrew?
It does, yes. Happy memories.
Whatever.
I like the word stallion there.
When you disappeared behind that taverna all those years ago.
Yeah. No, he's put it all in, or else his ghost has put it all in, and basically left him to this car crash. He hasn't got, no one seems to have advised him about any sort of, whether some of the stuff was wise. And I mean, one of the ironies I find is I'm constantly trying to get royal material from years ago, and it's banned. And yet here we are getting the horse's mouth from a few weeks ago.
Indeed.
Slight status, but it's good stuff, as you say. I mean, it's, and in some ways, this drip feed has been very good because there's a new headline every day.
I mean, to me, the most remarkable thing, and this is especially in the interviews he's just been doing before we record, is very strongly critical of Camilla.
Yep.
And I think, and this goes back to things you and I have talked about before, it's his raising old ghosts for me, from an era when, royal spin really was a very dark art. I know Elsa will disagree, I'm sure, because she worked for the Queen, and by and large, everybody thinks the Queen plays it very straight. But, raising Camilla takes us back to the Diana Charles wars, what was going on, how did they manipulate news to attack each other, what was Camilla's real role in all this?
Well, remember, his loyalties was to his mother. He's, in some ways, adopted his mother rather cynically, I think, as a way of pushing his cause. And of course, you're in one of two camps generally, the Diana or the Camilla camp, or a lot of people are. And so this is very easy to play that game. But it seems very insensitive because, we have moved on. She is now the Queen Consort, and he claims he doesn't want to hurt his family. Well, this is probably, as you say, the easiest way of landing a blow on them.
It's fun, he talks about Camilla's ambition to become Queen Consort and leaving, casualties in the road, I think the phrase he's used most recently. And there was a period, just before Diana died and the few years after, where Charles's office were particularly aggressive. They went after, for example, poor old Prince Edward that time, when he was filming William in St Andrews. A story I know a little bit about, actually. I met the director of that show, and he said that the real story was so much more complicated than what was presented. They weren't really breaking the rules at all, but they absolutely went for them. And I think the other members of the royal family, I was told, were just terrified at that point of Charles and his operation, that they were out to get people. And that was partly so as to create space for Camilla. I mean, this might be stuff I believe and nobody else does, but I think he's raising those ghosts now.
Well, Mark Bolan clearly had a job to basically make Camilla acceptable, and I suspect some people were thrown under the bus to do that as part of the bigger picture. But it's ironic. Here is Harry railing against the press and against intrusion, and yet he, in some ways, is briefing the press against his family in a far worse way than any member of the family has ever done.
Oh, I think so. Yes, I agree.
Hypocrite.
I
think
agree.
Why it's very hard to have sympathy for him. It's not just that he's a damaged soul, but he's a complete hypocrite. Here he lectures people on, carbon emissions and jumps on jets and exploits his royal position. If he'd gone quietly into the sunset, I think people would have had a bit more sympathy for him.
I think he did have he's had a lot of sympathy in America. You've seen these various awards they've been given for standing up for, against prejudice and speaking their truth. And, there's always a Kennedy family, one of the many members on hand to give you an award in America. But, that's a big part of their world, and they are quite successful there. Although I do wonder, I get a sense it might be changing just from the coverage I've seen of the book.
I definitely think it's changing. I mean, this has been, I think these interviews, and we'll see what happens with some of the other American interviews, but I think it's definitely changing. The thing is, a bit like the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, there will always be a group of sycophants who will hang around you, who will want to take advantage of you and use you. And so he's not going to be short of people. And there's a lot of people who will buy into the story and the new narrative that he's created, which no one can challenge because, of course, the royal family wouldn't. And so I think, there'll be two, a bit like Camilla and Diana, there'll be two sides. And people will be perhaps taking more entrenched positions.
Yes, I think you're a harder man than me, Andrew. I'm a bit too soft for this game of scandal mongering. I do have more sympathy for him, I think, perhaps than you do and others do. And I can understand, why, for example, when Clarkson, we discussed this last year, when Clarkson wrote that horrible article, why didn't the palace immediately come out and say that was awful? Okay, they can't be denouncing everybody who says
because it was so evidently awful. I mean, everyone else did the job for them. I think in some ways, staying above the fray as they do is very clever. Other people can fight those battles. And I mean, I think almost everyone denounced Clarkson and he had to apologize. I mean, it was ridiculous. I'm amazed Sunday Times allowed that piece to run.
It was the Sun. It was the Sun.
Sorry.
I think we got that wrong.
Back.
Sorry. I think we should, if we're holding other people...
Apologise to Sunday Times.
We should. I did on Twitter. But no, look, I just felt it was an easy win for them. As you say, everybody else was criticising him. Why didn't they?
No need to get into the fray if other people are going to fight the battle. And also, these things pass very, very quickly. I mean, you're talking about attitudes to Charles. Well, think how they've changed in 20 years, and so in some ways, it's Taurus fish and chips. It's a good story now. I mean, I feel it's a sort of guilty pleasure because I feel we're just fanning the flames of publicity for him. He's going to sell more books, make more money that's going into his pocket, not to any of these charities. And that was a bad move on his part. At least Sarah Ferguson gave a percentage of her monies to charity. But I feel uncomfortable. Here we are, in some ways, helping him along the road to a lot of money.
Yes, and maybe not a lot of happiness, though. It doesn't look well. It doesn't look happy. That interview with his friend Tom, what's his name? Bradby. ITV yesterday. I mean, he didn't enjoy it. That's for sure.
Tom Bradby didn't enjoy it.
Oh, Harry didn't enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, I thought he was more articulate than I expected. I don't know how well briefed he was. Probably better than his uncle, Andrew. But
yes, but he wasn't that bad a cock. He wasn't anything like Andrew's interview with Emily Maitlis, that's for sure.
But I mean, in some ways, the Royals shouldn't do these interviews. It never ends well. We talked about Panorama. We've got the Newsnight. You're never going to beat the press, and I think the Queen's idea of just never explain, never complain was a good one. Well, good for us journalists and writers, because, of course, the more that this dirty washing is produced in public, the better it is for us. But for their own dignity, it's better it's kept quiet.
No, I think you're right. And yes, having mentioned the Queen, this might be a very apposite moment to use the magic of editing to introduce our special guest. Shall we do that?
Yes, good idea.
Okay. Well, here we go. Edit away, edit away.
Hi.
Hi there, how are you?
Very well. Nice to see you.
And you too, sweetie. Good Christmas, good New Year.
Yes, very good. Thank you. Yes, I'm busy. I'm doing a book on Andrew, as you know, on Andrew and Fergie. So I've been doing that.
Hello, nice to meet you, Elsa.
Hi there, how are you? Did you have a Christmas and New Year?
I did, thank you. And I hope you did too.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you. Thank you.
And we've returned to a scandal-rich new year, it would seem.
Oh, Lordy. I did good GB News yesterday. And honestly, I think I'm tired of my own voice talking about it now.
Well, there's a podcast. I saw there's a podcast coming up, which I'm looking forward to listening. It was on your LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm a member of this Barney group called the Mayfair Collective, who work for high net worth individuals. And one of the guys is an ex-security expert who wanted to talk about communication security and sort of the clashes between the two on some occasions. So I just talked about doing it with the royal family. But yeah, everyone's a communications expert, as you know, Andrew.
Exactly. So-called royal expert. You are a real expert.
Well, you are. I'd love to start by asking you, all anybody's talking about is royal spin and the terrible things, apparently, that royal spin doctors have been doing to Harry and Meghan. I mean, you're actually a real-life one. So kind of like, what do you think of all that? And what's that life really like from the inside?
Well, I have to say, because the royal family and the Queen doesn't talk about, they don't set policies, that's government. You're not really a spin doctor. What you want to do is promote the causes that members of the royal family contribute to in a favourable way. That's what any communications expert does. And I have to say, the 13 years that I worked as communications press secretary to the Queen, there was never one occasion ever where I ever briefed against another member of the royal family to serve on my own member of the royal family. So I can only talk from experience. That absolutely never happened under my watch.
And do you think it might have happened under someone else's watch more recently?
I would very much doubt it, and certainly under the Queen's reign, Andrew. It's just someone she just wouldn't counter. She wouldn't want her own family attacked to further somebody else's needs. It just wouldn't be something she would counter. She would be furious.
So
It's just the institution as a whole, and that's the most important thing. I look at all the Harry and Meghan furore at the moment, and you're a historian, you know far better than I do. But I don't see this as a constitutional crisis. I see it as a bump in the road. It's just not the 1936 application. This is a book that the fifth in line to the throne has written, and he's obviously deeply unhappy and he's deeply damaged by his experiences, his account. But I don't see it as the end of the monarchy. Do you?
That it's a sort of family tragedy. No, I don't. No, I think it's. In some ways, the more he goes on, the more of a suicide note it becomes, doesn't it?
I think you're absolutely right. And certainly when if they did the Oprah interview a year ago, I think the American people certainly were very, very sympathetic towards their cause, and they thought that the British royal family and monarchy were institutionally racist, sexist, out of touch, out of date. I think that mood has shifted now with the American population. I think they're growing weary of these constant sort of claims that Prince Harry has been making. And I think he's purported to be writing 2 further books. What on earth is he going to put in them? What is left to sell, really?
And do you think there has any justification, any of the claims that he's made?
I don't know. I can only talk from own personal experience. I know he had a very difficult relationship with the media, and I can see certainly in some points that he does have a fair point of view. If you've got one day a tabloid really, really defaming you and sticking the knife in, and then the next day they're on a royal road to reporting on you, most human beings are going to be pretty upset about that. So I think he's got a point there. But there are other issues where I don't think he has a point. And I think the royal household are incredibly wise not to rebut. I think the dignified silence that they are doing at the moment and not rising to any of the bait is actually the way forward. Well, I'm sure it's with a heavy heart that they're doing it. But as you said, it is a family tragedy.
One of the
Public.
One of the things that's been said is not so much that people have been attacking them kind of behind closed doors, but that the establishment, the palaces, wouldn't defend them in the way perhaps they would have defended other people. Now, I don't know how practical it would be to be endlessly defending somebody who's been criticised, but do you think there's anything in that? I mean, or how do they come to believe that, do you think?
Certainly during my time, we had a fantastic firm of lawyers, and there were so many legal letters that went to newspapers when there were huge inaccuracies and libelous stories about various members of the royal family. So absolutely, when there was a case of rebuttal, we did rebut. But it's very difficult if you see a story and it's one fact that's wrong, all the rest is more or less correct, and you rebut that one fact because it sets a precedent, and then you have to go through every fact. And when it's personal, it's a personal story about a member of the royal family, they don't want to talk about it, then basically your hands are tied anyway.
That's so interesting. We had Valentine Lowe as a guest a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure you know, he was one of the main journalists responsible for raising allegations about bullying and mistreatment of staff at the hands of largely at Meghan's hands. Now, of course, nobody would call Valentine a tabloid journalist. He's a establishment reporter for an establishment newspaper at the time.
Yeah.
And so it seems to me maybe there's a thing here where it's much easier to attack the tabloids because sometimes they frankly deserve it, whilst avoiding perhaps things that more serious writers and historians are saying. Is that the game, do you think?
I don't know. I think it's very easy to put every newspaper under the umbrella of tabloid. I know members of the royal family had issues with, whether it's the Times, the Telegraph, the Guardian, or as it was the News of the World. I think it's just it's an easy title to put all publications under. You could say Tom Bradby's interview last night is that sort of tabloid-esque version of a broadcast. It wasn't particularly heavyweight, weighty.
MA made this, was it?
Yeah.
And I mean, do you think that some of Harry's friends will now feel that they should come forward and present another side, that even if the royal family stays above the fray? And I mean, that's presumably not going to be very helpful either.
What friends, Andrew? I think all the friends that certainly he had here, the Mark Dyers, who was with him, Jamie Lowther Pinkerton, all those incredibly heavyweight statesman-like friends that the Prince Harry had advising him, have all fallen by the wayside now. So when you say friends, what friends? Whose friends? I think he has isolated himself in California. He's got no family there. I don't know what friends he has there, unless they're friends of his wives. So, interesting point you make. What friends? Certainly not his childhood ones.
Yeah, well, I suppose, in inverted commas, friends. I mean, people who feel perhaps that they've been loyal to him and now feel that they want to defend the institution that he's attacking.
I think they would probably want to take advice from the Prince of Wales. And I saw in the Sunday newspapers yesterday, a few of Prince William's friends have started to speak out, and they have said, we've defended Harry, we've kept all the bodies under the floorboards, we've protected, but now maybe it's a time to start speaking up. And I think people who are loyal to the Prince and Princess of Wales would want to speak out. The attacks seem to be pretty obviously one-sided because no one's saying anything else, but pretty vitriolic. It's my brother making these points. It's like open season. It's like being on a shooting range. Every bullet sticks.
Yeah. But I mean, it's backfiring. I mean, in some ways, do you think he should have been better advised to moderate his and focus his play?
I do. But it goes back again to who is advising him. There are no elder statesmen in California saying to him, actually, sir, if you do this, the consequences of that. So he's got his PR people. He's got Penguin Books. So of course, he's a cash cow for them, isn't he? So of course they want the most salacious bits in the book to sell copies. So I don't think there's anyone saying to him, whoa, have a step back. Don't do this.
I thought of the comment about killing 25 people was a classic example of what happens when you rush a book, or maybe what happens when you keep a book secret. Andrew and I both know, we've both written books, maybe you have as well, as I don't know. It's always great to show it to a friend or two, isn't it? Because you always make mistakes. You always get the tone wrong, even if you don't intend to. Somebody could have spotted that. And they didn't, I guess, because the publishers wanted to keep it super secret.
Yeah. And I spoke to an army officer friend of mine over the weekend. And, the military are massively wounded about this because they thought he was one of them. And they've got a sense of betrayal now. He said to me, he may have been an officer, but he's sure no gentleman. Well, I think that's a good point. And he, by saying what he's said, is putting military lives at risk when they go on overseas deployments. They're putting the public potentially at risk. And we've got a great big coronation happening this year with a huge security implication. How have Harry's words affected that? And then you have members of the royal family going and visiting their regiments when they're overseas. Will that carry on? So it's just that the knock-on effect of those sort of throwaway lines will have in the future. And I don't think he's thought it through. Well, certainly no one seems to have thought it through.
Gosh, I mean, Andrew and I, we're closer than brothers, but we don't always agree. He's not knocked me into a dog's bowl yet.
No, they're giving you some ideas, though.
Well, there is one area we maybe disagree a little bit. I did a bit of work on Diana, wrote a biography, made a couple of TV series. And I believe, you may not agree, I believe that during that very vicious, bitter time when their marriage was falling apart in public, there was briefing. And then maybe it wasn't briefing by somebody like you. It was maybe somebody's friends were authorized to say something.
Yeah.
And I think some things were said about Diana, especially concerning her mental health, which were regrettable and wounding. And I wonder if that's lurking somewhere in Harry's brain as a justification for what you say he is interpreting today. Is that fair?
Maybe. I don't know. I know exactly who you're referring to with the mental health comment. But then, of course, the late Princess of Wales was known for briefing the media herself. If you think of her relationship with Richard Kay of the Daily Mail, and she would meet him and give him a story about her estranged husband or about the household. So, it's almost tit for tat. They were both as bad as each other.
Yes, it was. I found a clip, actually, from an interview I did with Stuart Higgins, who had been...
I'm taking him punch on Friday.
He told us, and this was only a few years after Diana's death, and people were speaking maybe more freely then than they would now. He told us of regular conversations with Camilla. This is before the divorce and during the divorce, where she would ring and they'd chat. And he said to me, to my series, you know what, I reckon she got more out of me than I ever got out of her. So, then you have the situation with Harry, looking at what happened to Camilla, and he's obviously quite bitter about it. He feels she's maneuvered herself, used the media perhaps. I mean, I've just tried to present some kind of pro-Harry arguments here.
Yeah. No, it's his truth, as he says.
Yeah.
And, you can only, I wasn't there. I didn't experience what he experienced. He lost his mother tragically at a very young age. He's seen this bitterness with both camps, go all around him. But so did William. And William is not acting like this. William lived through the same scenario as Harry. And yet William is not behaving in this manner.
I mean, if you were advising Harry, what would you suggest he should be doing?
First of all, giving up his title. I think both of them. I know he was asked by Tom Bradley last night, or was it one of the news items?
It was American. It was the Anderson, I think.
Okay, yeah, and he said, basically, what's the point? I would stop. Stop talking. Proof is in the pudding. Start putting your considerable voice into some proper charitable action, rather than keep words are okay, but actions speak louder than. So stop doing what you're doing, and actually start working properly, working for the causes that you're so passionate about.
Yeah, I did feel he made a few mistakes actually in some of these interviews. talking about the William dog bowl confrontation, saying that William was just parroting the press. And actually, if you look back, this happened nearly a year before Valentine Lowe wrote that story. He wasn't parroting the press. If he was parroting anybody, he was parroting people who worked for him, who were finding it very challenging to work for his brother.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's no smoke without fire. And also, of course, I remember when they got engaged, speaking to friends of mine who still work in the royal household. And I was working for the Archbishop of Canterbury at the time. And there was just such a joy around this announcement and a hope. Wow, the royal family that's leading the way. It's been multicultural, multiracial, modern, in touch. And it was just like, wow, look at us, get us. We are a leader in this. So there was a real hope and an excitement about.
Absolutely. That's been kicked into the memory hole, hasn't it? From California. The idea that she was just like, everybody hated Meghan from the word go. It's not what I remember at all.
Simply not. Absolutely. You look at the crowds. And, I was at Winter for the wedding. And the crowds lined in, and the goodwill. And the goodwill within the household. So that narrative, which is just so untrue, reading in that real fake news.
Do you think he's landed any blows on the monarchy? I mean, or is this, as you say, just a storm in a teacup? They'll sit it out and it'll be fine.
I think they will sit it out and they will be fine. I think if this had been the first interview that he'd done since they left, I think it would have been far more damaging than it has been. But because we've already had Oprah, because we've already had 6 Netflix documentaries, because we've already had the book leak, I think there is a wariness now amongst the public, certainly the British public. We're all concerned about feeding our children and paying our heating bills and trying to get into London if there's not a train strike or if our nurses are going to get a pay rise, rather than a prince and the duchess sitting in a $17 million mansion in California saying everybody hates us.
But I mean, isn't the problem is selling books, it's selling newspapers, and so of course there's a speeding frenzy with the press. We'd be better, as you say, not doing these podcasts, Phil, and not giving him this oxygen.
But it'll go, don't you think? He can't grab the headlines forever. And I think the longer it goes on, the more damaging it will be for him.
I think there has been one blow, actually, and I think it was the very first one in the Oprah interview. And funnily enough, they've backed away from this a little bit.
And the racism.
Well, speculation about the colour of the baby, and and I think certainly outside Britain, and they explicitly link this to the idea that the British establishment is tainted by historical connections to slavery and so on and so forth. And of course, it doesn't help then when people pop up like Clarkson and really put the boot in an ugly way. But I mean, I think that blow, in terms of the way that Britain is perceived, especially from America, which is a key relationship for this country, I think that could have lasting damage. And when the next royal visit, there may well be protests, and I think that would be different and new.
I agree, but I think if he'd made that claim during his book and interview now, it would have had more resonance than it. I mean, it's already out there, isn't it? It's been out there for a year. And you're right, I think that was the one fact in the Oprah interview that really shocked people. And of course, there was even a shout out when Prince William was on engagement, and he defended the royal family, saying, the royal family is absolutely not a racist family, which is almost unprecedented in itself for a member of the royal family.
It is.
Address something like
that. Do your contacts, I'm sure, I'm not asking you to reveal any great secrets, but does anybody come up with a theory about how they got that impression? Does anybody know how that might have, perhaps an innocuous, friendly conversation?
There's a lot of speculation. Somebody said to me, it could have been a Jew. Is the baby going to be a ginger? So I don't know. Was it, the brothers, when they were getting old, were known for their, humour, and Mickey taking of each other. Could it have been something like that? I have no idea. I don't know.
And I mean, is the picture he presents as of rivalries going right back through childhood? I mean, is this a picture that the public didn't know about but actually existed, or are these perceived slights that he's now bringing out that no one realised were there?
That's a really, really good question. So I obviously wasn't around when they were growing up, but I spoke to Ken Wolfe yesterday, who of course was their protection officer, when they were boys. And he said there was rivalry, and Harry did feel that he was the spare. He was the heir. William was always the one with the limelight because he was the heir to the throne, and Harry always played second fiddle. So there was, yes, absolutely, from almost day one, there was that rivalry. But then there might be, my kids are like that, Andrew. My son always learned the favorite, I'm the oldest. And so lots of boundaries have that sort of
Exactly.
chemistry.
And the bigger bedroom and all that,
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Thanks.
It's a bit like, you have your firstborn child, you take a photograph of every move. You have your second child, there's 0 photographs.
Very true.
You're giving them gin. And I mean, do you think the royal family will change the PR? I mean, if you were doing advising on PR, would you do anything to respond to these or just business as usual?
Business as usual. Absolutely. I think if you start responding to one, then you're going to have to start responding to everything because you're setting a precedent. I think, again, proof is in the pudding. Go out, do your duties. Go and do your engagement. Christmas is over now. It's business as usual. So I think they roll up their sleeves and get on with it.
So, I mean, for example, now,
Sorry, say that again.
will do what they normally do. I mean, for example, we're talking about the accusations of racism. Would they, particularly after Susan Hussey, would you encourage them to do more events which show they're not racist, or, just carry on doing the things that they're required to do?
What you don't want to do is do tokenism. I'm going to go, I remember before I joined the household, there was that iconic photograph of the Queen in that council flat in Glasgow. Do you remember?
Yes.
2 chairs in this flat. It was after Diana had died. They wanted to show that the Queen was in touch or relevant. And it was just awful. I mean, it was just blatant PR. And then what the royal family don't want to do is just be a PR puff. So what you don't want to do is do tokenism. But, the King is head of the Commonwealth. What is more of a multicultural, multiracial family than the Commonwealth? So I'm sure he will do a lot with that. Realms, the coronation. There's an opportunity to actually showcase the multicultural nature of this country and the Commonwealth and the world.
I think an education job as well, because people who are not British and just don't know. I mean, this line that the Commonwealth is basically the empire repackaged. You and I might think it's ludicrous, but actually it really registered outside Britain. Really did on social media.
Well, I mean, you think of some of those royal tours recently in the Caribbean. I mean, I don't know, is that the fault of the Foreign Office not briefing the royal family properly, not preparing the ground, or were there some mistakes made in judging public mood there?
I can only say how an overseas royal visit is planned. So obviously you have an input here, but the program is generally drawn up by the host country, so those who know the country most, in collaboration with either the High Commissioner or the Ambassador. Then it's presented to the household. They look at it, but they're acting on advice of those who are actually on the ground who know the country. So my understanding for the country you're talking about, that awful image of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge as they were, putting their hands through the metal wires to greet people on the other side. Awful. But that program was devised by those on the ground.
Yeah. And I mean, I suppose also the press can present any image they want. I mean, I understand that they were able to walk round the fence afterwards. I mean, it wasn't as if they were caged.
Absolutely. And once one person, I think it was Johnny Nine from the BBC, once one person started, it just, it was like a roller coaster. Everyone jumped on it.
On things. Oh, have you any more questions? I think
we've literally rattled through the subject really quickly, and it's so interesting to hear from an absolute insider like yourself. I guess the only question do
you know what I would say is I'm just glad that the Queen is not alive to see this, because she absolutely loved her family. She loved her grandchildren. The 2 boys, she was always been there for them. She's very close to both of them. And I think it would have totally broken her heart to see this, especially played out in the public arena. She was very private when it came to family, and she would have just loathed this.
No, I'm sure she would.
I suppose it's the impact of Meghan and the therapy, I suspect, has not helped this, that this has played out publicly. But I mean, I know you've always been a great believer in playing a completely straight bat and have a very good relationship with the press, and the royal household and the press had a good relationship. So, in some way.
And it's give and take. It's give and take. Yeah, absolutely. And I feel very sorry for the royal household. I've never worked for a more professional, loyal, honest group of people ever. And they must be feeling incredibly battered and bruised by all of this and its relentlessness. So I feel incredibly sorry for them.
And if you got the call from California, get on the next plane, Elsa, and help us out. A, would you take it? And B, what would you ask them to do?
I think my first question would be, how much?
Really?
Well, you'd be doing your service to the country if you did that.
I think it would hit. I think any reconciliation and rehabilitation for them will be quite a long process here.
And would you see parallels with Windsor's? I mean, the sense of the family freezing out, the retrograde, the rogue royal.
No, I don't. I don't at all. I think the king will always keep the door open. I think they will be invited to the coronation. I suspect they might attend and use the reason for attending for their children. You know, it's their grandfather being crowned king, so they must be a part of it, which would be quite a neat way of getting around the whole issue. So no, I think the door will always be open. But I think it goes back to also an element of trust. If they do have private conversations with the king and the Prince of Wales, will it be on the front page of the New York Times or on the next edition of Oprah? So I think the reconciliation will be a slow process, very slow.
And if they come, it will be a very awkward meeting. I mean, it's very difficult for people to be civil in those circumstances.
Yes, no, absolutely. But they did it for the funeral. They did it for the Platinum Jubilee, where presumably tensions were very, very high there, but they managed to keep calm and carry on. So I'm sure if they wanted to do it, they could do that. They could fight through. You can imagine all those body experts, couldn't you? And the lip reading experts analysing every movement.
Yeah. No, well, that's an optimistic way to end, I think, the podcast, isn't it, Phil?
It is. And thank you so much for your insights. I think there is hope. And don't forget, they've come back from, the Diana Charles stuff, Camilla Gate tapes. Who'd have thought when you heard that 20 years later, he'd be becoming the king and everybody would be saying, he's quite a decent bloke, really. Just time and application and maybe, as you say, oyster-like silence is the way forward for these guys. Thank you so much for your insights and your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Scandal Mongers podcast. This has been a Podcast World production. You can get in contact with our show by emailing team@podcastworld.org, placing Scandal Mongers in the heading, or via our social media links within the show's bio.